Okay, well, good evening, and welcome to our Wednesday night Bible study as we have been going through the High Sabbaths, right? So, High Sabbaths are these special moments, festivals, rituals that take place during the year in Judaism. And so we have been looking at, well, first we looked at the Sabbath itself, and we looked at, what all goes into those every Sunday. And now we're looking at the high Sabbaths or the special festivals or the special days, if you will, that happen throughout the Jewish year. So we're going to be looking at, continue to look at the Passover. And the Passover has several elements to it. Typically we have Easter. Easter essentially is just it's one day. Christmas is just one day. The Passover really is a celebration that takes place over 50 days. And there's all kinds of things that are associated with it. And one of the things that we're going to talk about tonight, this evening, is the Seder Meal. And the Seder is very heavy in meaning. All the different things that they do within the meal itself have some type of meaning. So the meal, all the elements of the meal, there's just so many things associated with the Seder. Seder actually means order, and there's a very specific order that you'll see develop as we go through this. The other thing that I would say to you also as we go through this and as we talk about it and go through these elements, I want you to think about the special holidays that we observe, not just Christmas and Easter, but think about other holidays and all the little traditions that we put within those holidays. Thanksgiving, for instance, that's coming up really soon. I mean, we're essentially less than a month away from Thanksgiving, and that's a special day. It has a lot of rituals to it. The cooking, the family getting together, those sorts of things. Then again, Christmas and Easter, they also have their traditions. There's a biblical part that we try to focus on, the birth of our Lord and Savior, the death and resurrection of Christ. But there's also all the traditional stuff that we do, the presents and Santa and the decorating that happens around Christmas time, Easter, everyone putting on their best. It's like, it's the one Sunday a year that everyone just looks their best for whatever reason. But we do that on Easter, right? And then we have a dinner maybe afterwards, or there's the Easter egg hunt, or the Easter bunny, or whatever it may be. We all have our traditions. So Scripture lays out for the Jews, really starting in Exodus, um, different things that they are to observe, and there are some instructions that are given in those things. But over time, those things expanded, like so many things in Judaism. The law was given, and the law was expanded on. It made it really more complicated than what God had given them. The Passover meal, the Passover festival, the holidays, there's all these different traditions that go along with it. But then there are the things that are biblical. So as we go through the Seder meal, something that is supposed to take place, but also has a lot of meaning behind it. There's the traditional parts that are associated with it, along with the biblical part. But I want you to think about the other holidays that we as believers celebrate, and you can see some relationships between how they're doing things with the Seder meal, and we can point to go, oh, well, that happens too with this, or we do this at this point in time. Some things that we'll we'll read tonight, and you'll think about Easter because it's very similar to some things that we do at Easter. Especially what I think is funny is one of the things that's associated with the Seder meal that is a traditionally important part of Easter. So let's just dive into it. We're talking about the Seder meal tonight. So at the center, well, first let me say this too. The Seder meal, it is for lack of better, it's a long process. Like it is a whole big ritual thing that takes place, and it can last a while. So you can have the Seder ceremony meal, and then have your meal. And some of the things that I read said sometimes the actual meal itself doesn't happen until like midnight. By the time you get to the whole Seder part of things and you hit the meal itself, it takes a while. And there are some times where some families, I mean, they're like into the wee hours of the morning celebrating the Passover meal. So anyway, it's interesting. And also keep in mind that this is the meal that Jesus and the apostles and other disciples that were in that upper room are partaking in when Jesus institutes the Lord's Supper. So think about that as we go through some of this. And there's going to be a moment when I talk about this certain moment in the Seder that I think that we may all agree that this is probably the moment that Jesus implemented that. Now, I'm saying probably because we don't know for sure at what point during that meal, but I would venture to say it's probably at this particular point, and we'll talk about it when we get there. So there's a Seder plate, and the Seder plate is on the table, and the Seder plate has a hard-boiled egg in the center of it. It has a roasted bone. It has bitter herbs, like a horseradish usually is what's used. It also has the courgette. The courgette is a mixture of chopped apples and nuts and cinnamon, wine, and sometimes honey is used as well as some of the recipes. There's the corpus or the greens, and the greens are usually like a parsley type of green. And then there's a small cup or a saucer of salt water. And in addition to that, there are 3 matzahs in the center, covered with a cloth, and there's typically a telling. It's called Haggadah. The telling is a book with special liturgy that is used throughout the evening meal. All of those elements that I just described to you, every single one of those elements have a special meaning part into the actual ceremony and the meal. And we're going to go through all of those elements and talk about them and talk about what they mean and why. So let's talk about the Kadesh. The Seder opens up with the reciting of the festival of the Kadesh over a glass of wine. Now, what's interesting is everyone drinks wine, and everyone drinks at least 4 glasses of wine. So this is a very wine-heavy meal, right? So everyone is going to have wine. Next comes the urchatz. This is the ritual washing of the hands. So the urchatz in other festivals and meals and things, it's like a ceremony within itself, right? The washing of your hands. There is a blessing that takes place. Now, in this particular part in the Seder, there is no blessing that takes place, but it's just a ceremonial time where you wash your hands. So there is a wash bowl available that everyone uses to wash their hands. Next is the karpas. These are leafy greens. They are dipped in salt water, and after the blessing of the karpas is recited, those things are then eaten. Then there's the yakatz, the middle matzah, right? The center of the table is broken in half, and a portion will be hidden, and that will be eaten at the end of the meal. So the tradition is that the host then tears that in two and then hides the matzah that is going to be sought after later, typically by kids, but in some families, households, they actually reverse it. Sometimes the kids take it and they go and hide it, and the parents or adults will go and they'll look for it. But typically the host gets it, it's torn in half, and they go and hide it. This is a point that it makes me wonder: is this the moment that Jesus broke bread and then did this part, and then said what he said? Because the next part of this, after that bread is torn and it's hidden, the next part is the Haggadah Read. And this is a section of the Seder that includes 4 questions. We'll talk about the 4 questions in just a moment. The list of the 10 plagues, the story of the Exodus, an explanation of the significance of the Paschal lamb, which is what is eaten at the dinner, and this is obviously to represent the lamb, excuse me, that each family used in the actual Passover in the story of Exodus to put the blood over the doorpost. And so that explains the other part is the matzah, and the second and third part are the glasses of wine. So think about that. The bread is torn, it's hidden. They go through this part, the 4 questions, the Exodus, the meaning behind everything, and it's time to eat the matzah and drink more wine. And that makes me wonder if that could be the moment that Jesus did that he actually told them, how to, remember to eat this, remember me, drink this, remember me thing, and basically instituted the Lord's Supper. So just throwing that out there just for, for thought. Next comes, and I cannot get this word right. I don't know what is wrong with me, but it's raksa. I think is correct. Actually, that might be the first time I've ever said that word correctly. But the raksa is another washing of the hands. But in this case, the actual blessing is said. So in the first time, there is no blessing. In this time, there is. So there's a blessing of the hands as they wash them. Again, matzah is eaten with a blessing for eating unleavened bread. The blessing that goes along with that serves the same purpose as the blessing of eating bread in a non-Passover meal, which signals the beginning of the meal proper. Next comes the bitter herb, the maror, which is dipped in the choreset, which is the bitter herbs, right? Or I'm sorry, the mixture of the apples and the nuts and the cinnamon and the wine. Sorry, let me say that again. So the bitter herbs are dipped in the apples and the other things, and that is eaten. And again, there is a blessing that takes place when that happens. Then comes a korech, a sandwich that is made of bitter herb. It's made with the apples and the wine and the honey and the nuts and matzah, and that is eaten. And then there's, of course, another custom to eat the Paschal sacrifice together with that. So the lamb that is sacrificed and cooked and eaten is also ate with this particular sandwich. Then after all of that has happened, so think about that. There's all these little bits and pieces of things that they do, and they eat and they drink the wine. They're up to 3 glasses of wine by now, by the way, in case you're not keeping tabs. 3 glasses of wine. So they're up to 3 glasses of wine, and then comes the actual meal. So there's all of the Seder ritual stuff that takes place, the blessings that take place, and then there's the actual meal that happens. So I don't know, a lot of wine, a lot of things already, and then the actual meal. Again, it could be midnight, could be past midnight before the meal takes place, but that's when it happens. Next comes a representation of the Paschal Sacrifice. So that matzah that is hidden is then found and is ransomed. So those who find it ransom it to everyone else. They get a little something, and it is eaten. And that officially ends the meal. There's no more food that should be eaten after that particular moment. So, what comes next then is a grace that is said over the meals. Then there are psalms that are read, and then there's the nurtza, which is the celebration is accepted. So those who assembled declare these words next year in Jerusalem. So every year, those Jews who are not in Jerusalem, when they get to the end of this meal, say next year in Jerusalem. So what I want you to keep in mind is back in the early part of the Jewish history, after the Exodus, after they've taken over the lands, after they are where they are, this was it still the celebration. And it is the celebration that everyone would come back for. So I almost liken it in a way to kind of a homecoming. This would happen, and it was that time of the year for the Passover, and all these people would come back, from wherever they were, to say in the world, but it's in that day and time, the world was very small, by their estimation anyway. So they would come back to Israel, and they would, be a part of all the rituals and the meals and all of that stuff. There are many Jews that are just scattered around the world today that have never stepped foot in Jerusalem. And so when they get to the end of this meal, they all say, next year in Jerusalem. And what's interesting, those who are in Jerusalem will end it by saying next year in a Jerusalem rebuilt. And then what they'll do is they'll follow up with some singing. There are some very specific Passover songs that are sang. The Seder is really meant to be a joyous occasion. It's where family and friends get together. Again, lots of drinking goes on. There's lots of food that is eaten. It is a major, major holiday with a large meal. It takes the entire evening. It goes for hours. I mean, this is like the ultimate Jewish fellowship. Like, we joke as Baptists, we love to eat, we love food, we love potlucks and all that kind of stuff. But man, this is it. I mean, this is the thing. This is like the festival for them at all times, right? So now the question becomes, as we looked at all those different elements, and we've talked about this over the past few weeks, what does this all mean? What is this all about? Why do this? What's the significance of all the elements and all of that? So to keep in mind, the Seder Passover, it happens right at the beginning of spring. Same thing. I mean, we have Easter, which is along the same time as Passover. So there's this representation, right? That the greens represent spring. The egg is a symbol of renewal. The roasted bone is a reference to the Paschal Sacrifice at the temple. All these different things, but they all have some type of religious or historical aspect that are just important to be reminded of as they go through these things. But ultimately, this whole experience is really about bringing them into an understanding of slavery and the freedom that they have from slavery because of what God did for them. Now, as a believer in Jesus Christ, we believe the Messiah has already come. And so for us, that's Easter. Easter is a reminder of the slavery that we were in sin, but we have freedom now. And not because of anything that we have done, but because of what God has done for us through Jesus Christ, who became the Passover lamb. He became the what's the word? Paschal. He became the Paschal sacrifice for all of us. So I just find that interesting when we think about what they're celebrating and why and how, and we can relate that to our belief, because while they believe the Messiah is not yet come, we know that he has. But to them, slavery and freedom and understanding that is really important. Also, exile and home. So the Jews, the nation of Israel has been exiled from their home more than once, and they're still fighting to keep their home today. Still trying to fight and keep what they know is their home. So this meal helps remind them of certain things about life and elements and that sort of thing that are really important for them to remember, right? In the same way, this is why we celebrate so much, Easter, is to help us remind us that Jesus died for us on the cross. So there's a lot of symbolism that takes place within that meal, and so I'm gonna go through some of that right now. So the salt water, for instance, and the bitter herbs, right? The bitterness of slavery. The salt water helps remind them of the tears that were cried by the Israelites. What are tears but salt water, essentially? The corset relates to the mortar that the Jews, so all that mixture of apples and nuts and wine and honey, that little mixture helps remind them of mortar that the Israelites had to mix to put together as they were building all the stuff they were building for Egypt while they were in slavery. They, you know, the bone and the meat that is eaten, the marrow that is eaten, is a reminder of the lamb again that was slain to put blood over the doorpost, so the angel would pass over that doorpost and not take the firstborn from that home. So we see all of the significance that is related to this particular meal. We also see lots of blessings and prayers that are given. I mentioned there are 4 questions. These 4 questions are typically asked by a child, and then an adult explains all of it. So the things that are asked are, why is this night different from all other nights? That's one of the 4 questions. And the responses are, on all other nights we eat either leavened or unleavened bread, but on this night we only eat matzah. And then the next thing that is said is, on all other nights we eat other kinds of vegetables, but on this night we eat bitter herbs. On all other nights we do not dip our vegetables even once, but on this night we dip twice. On all other nights we eat either sitting up or reclining, but on this night we all recline. So all these things are about what they're doing and why they're doing it and how it's supposed to help them relate to what took place in Exodus. It's all a reminder to the Jewish nation of what God has done and what he continues to do for them. He has gotten them out of slavery. He has gotten them to freedom. One might even look at, the Holocaust, which was such a horrible event. But one might say there was something else that God delivered the Jewish nation from, liberated them from extinction, essentially. When we think about the Holocaust, that was really the goal of Hitler and those in Germany, was to totally eliminate the nation of Israel. And that continues today, by the way. There are countries or groups of people that would love to annihilate the nation of Israel. Israel is constantly fighting, constantly trying to keep its freedom, constantly trying to fend off those who would love to destroy them. And we may not hear about it all the time, but it happens constantly. Rockets are always being fired into Israel. Israel's always having to defend. Again, we just don't hear about it all the time, but this is a daily occurrence. And so they continue to fight off to try to hold on to their land that they know is theirs because God promised it to them. But throughout the meal, throughout the night, there are all kinds of blessings and prayers that are given. And all of these things are to help them to understand that this is a fundamental change in the nature of the Jewish people, that throughout the liberation from Egypt, that they acquired the nature of free men and women, a nature that was not changed over centuries despite all the suffering and captivity that that was inflicted on them. So this is all to say that this is truly God that took them out of Egypt. And that's what the liturgy is all about. That's what all the symbolism is all about, is to get them to know and understand the importance of what God did for them. Okay? So that is a Seder meal. We're going to move on next week and talk about a lot of other things in the Passover and wrap up the Passover so we can move on to other things. So there's one more thing to talk about next week that we'll get into. If you have questions, you can text me, call me, Facebook me, private message me, or on here. And I'll try to answer them the best way that I can. Okay? We hope to see you at church on Sunday. 10:30 is, 9:30 is Sunday school, 10:30 worship service. And our construction's almost done. Like, I'm so excited. It is almost complete, which is great. Flooring should be done in a couple of weeks, and that's it. We're done. So I'm really excited about what's happening. And I hope you come check it out. And I hope to see you this Sunday. I hope you have a great and blessed week. And we'll talk to you soon. All right. Good night.